he did tours, and they're supposed to be a half-hour tour, but they were always 2 hours because he can't stop talking.
I have the same problem. In all my Q&As for my Zoom, I'm always like, the demonstration's about an hour, and then we have a Q&A at the end for like a half an hour. But I'm like, it always goes over.
Yeah.
Why not, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. You don't want to fit it into a box,
Right. And it's kind of like my first day of class every semester. The first day of class, I have my notes. It's not all written down, but the sort of headings. I got to cover this, cover that. But I really do it with the props I have around me, the palette, the books. I have a couple of books and my paints, and go through the supply list. And I usually plan for that to take 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes 3 hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I guess that's okay. I sometimes have to stop myself, though. Just say, okay, time to stop talking, get something done.
Yeah, it's not so linear.
Yeah.
I mean, the same way with me with teaching, I usually go in with a rough outline of what I want to teach, but I'm not like 9 o'clock introduction, 9:30, blah. I'm like, it's just too mechanical. Like, let it flow.
And it doesn't work that way for me. I can't. Yeah. Even when when I taught digital classes, I had to have notes and I had to have a little cheat sheet because there's so many things that I want to cover and not miss things. Because if you miss one thing, you can't get to the next step. So I always had a list of I'm going to cut, and sometimes it was a few pages. And then class would start and I would get rolling. And at a certain point, I'm not looking at that paper ever again because it's going. And the more times you teach it, I guess less you have to be so prepared. But I like surprises too. And the administrators in the school want that minute by minute account. What are you doing? What's the outcome? How is this helping students and all of that stuff? But it's a much more big organic thing, and it doesn't happen that way. So I've got it sort of on a real specific calendar and timetable schedule, but that usually is not. It all changes when things get rolling.
Would you say that's a metaphor for the way that you work? Like it's because when people ask me about like writing. I always talk about it as like I write the same way that I draw, which is I roughly block it in. For somebody who does clay. I roughly block it in. Then I can kind of see it, and then I would begin to dig in. And as things form, I take a break and come back, and I can see it more clear.
Exactly. I think painting and ceramics, forming sculptural things are very similar, and my paintings start out really rough, and I get the kind of exactitude later if I do, and it's the only way I can work, and it might be what I learned with illustration projects, where you have to have that drawing, you have to have it all figured out.
Yeah.
To present what you're going to make before you make it. And I always found that really difficult for me, because once you've submitted that sketch and you have to execute. Have that exact image. I got in trouble because I had added a leaf in a particular spot in an illustration, and it was right after graduating, and it was just being a little naive. But it was fall, so Hatchett, what was his name? Brian in the book, Hatchett. It was his next book, Brian's Winter, and it was fall approaching winter, and he had to make a shelter, and so he was chopping wood, and I just put this maple leaf right next to him because there was an empty spot there, but that was right where my art director was going to put his type.
Oh.
and it was a good learning experience. But that's what happens with painting for me, is it starts out with a particular idea and it changes as I go.
Yeah.
It's something maybe a little better. maybe a little turn in the direction or some
follow
adding
the
something
painting
in there.
The painting leads you.
Yeah. And I'm good with that process, I think, except sometimes it takes a long time. I have some paintings that are years to, or they just get put down for a while.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get back to them, but I'm doing that more now. I think.
Yeah.
Go back to paintings that I had kind of, I don't destroy them or throw them away.
You live with them.
I keep them. It's a little bit of a hoarding, and I made them. And if someone buys them, it's easy to let them go. But it's kind of like, I can always do something with this. And you can kind of see that I save stuff. My father couldn't throw a nail away. And so have a similar problem. But I'm starting to try to deal with that. You can't save everything you make.
Yeah.
And the pottery is a lot different because now that I know what I'm making and I have my customers and a wholesaler, it all gets sold. It all goes, whatever I make.
Yeah.
Eventually. So I think the pottery, this working with ceramics and that puts an end on it. You fire it, it's over. It's done.
Yeah.
The second firing, you could fire it again, but it's kind of easy to say, okay, that's done. It's not like a painting. And that's probably my most difficult struggle is finishing, or knowing when to say,
yes,
it's finished or it's done. And I try to have to get that notion out of my head maybe and think that I'm happy with it. Or, it's where I want it to be, kind of. The idea of it being finished with a painting. And I suppose the way I paint, it's difficult to say, okay, now it's done.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say, it's done, Paul, stop.
Yeah.
And I want to just go just a bit more, but not too far where it becomes boring, overworked. Because there's the same, I think, with the clay and with the paint. I like to leave my finger marks in it. I like to leave the
individuality
and show the process in the final thing.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of paintings in the attic that I just got really caught up in making marks and tightening things up, and then they lose that energy of the early mark making, which is like dancing around.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the quote I said earlier by Chase, it takes two artists to paint, one to stand behind with an axe before the artist destroys it.
Yeah. Well, and I guess we all have to have that person in our head or a gallery or someone that's saying, okay, that's exactly what we need.
Yeah. I think the hard thing too is to have a vision of what it is, like where to stop. So if you're looking at Sargent or Cecilia Bow or Mary Cassatt or someone on the looser side.
Right.
One thing I recommend is like put them up in your studio to remind you to stop.
Right.
If that's where you're heading.
Yeah. There's a portrait by Mary Cassatt that I saw Thursday when we took my grandson to the RISD Museum, and it's
it's a little girl,
quarter in a blue bonnet, and a quarter of it is raw canvas.
Yeah.
There's no paint on it at all.
It's in the Oil Painter's Color Handbook.
Is it?
Yeah, I pulled it for it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm halfway through that. I read the
last chapter.
The last chapter. So
I talk about process, and I talk about
love that thing.
Studying unfinished work.
Right.
And that's one where you can see the canvas. You can see that it was a sketch of a child, and she stopped. But
and I've been doing portraits just about once a week for about a year now.
Yeah.
At a couple of places that have weekly portrait session. You just have a model for 3 hours, and it's been really good. And that's what I want. That's the paintings I want to make, is like that. I like the real visceral quality of the marks and all of that. And I feel like I almost always overdo it because I want to cover the whole canvas and all that. So I'm working on that. And I guess it's both the painting, plein air painting, and painting portraits like that. There's a time constraint. You only have so much time.
Yeah.
So that's what I take away from it, is that I need to do that on the other paintings. The studio paintings is just, I don't know, be really present and active in the time you have in the studio, because our lives are too busy now.
Yes. But there's a beauty about even taking a break, I think.
Yeah.
And stepping away.
Yeah.
And sometimes when it's done, like, because we get we have trouble, I think, judging a painting if we're staring at it too long. Right? Yeah. That's why like teachers come around and they're like, stop.
Yeah.
You're going to destroy it.
Or step back. Step back. And so I do think there's stepping back from your painting as you're working on it, but there's also stepping back for a while and maybe just put it away. And there's a danger, because I have a lot of paintings that were put away and they stayed away. And I also, because I don't do a lot of preliminary working out the composition for a painting before I paint. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I do, but it's really little thumbnails in my sketchbook, and just to figure out the basic design and then get it on the canvas, because all of that changes after the first layer.
Have you had any crazy odd jobs?
Odd jobs. I've had a lot of jobs.
Yeah.
Let's see, Paperboy. Before that, I was a babysitter. That's my first time I made a little money for babysitting for the neighbors, which was great. I got to be Saturday night, go across the street, stay up late and watch color TV, which that we didn't have. But I was a paper boy. And then summers, I went to United Truck and Bus Company, and I was cleaning school buses, washing the ceilings and sweeping them out. And then when I was in high school, I was pumping gas. Went to Rhode Island College, was still working at the same time, pumping gas at the bus company. And then I became kind of a mechanic, worked in the body shop, worked in the tire man. I was an assistant tire man and an assistant body shop man. Then my wife and I got together, got married, and started having babies. And I got a job driving a sheetrock truck, delivering building materials, which I did for 14 years. So that was about 10 years of that. I didn't make any art, didn't do any artwork. I had 3 children and a job and lots of responsibilities. And I enjoyed that, being a daddy and all that stuff. And I didn't make hardly any art at all, maybe a drawing now and then. And I started doing art after a while, after the kids had gone to bed, and get up. And I remember I got Betty Edwards' book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain.
Yeah.
And I did that. I followed that book and drew the portraits upside down and all of that stuff. And I always like having my own little reconnection with art making, which I did in high school. And when I was a kid, I was always drawing. We were talking about jobs. So I did that for 14 years. I drove a big truck and delivered sheetrock and operate the crane and all that stuff, which was kind of exciting. And then I did start painting in the evening, made a little studio in my house, and I somehow ended up going back to school. Went to RISD and finished my degree, got a BFA, and then I got another job teaching. Actually started with teaching computer basics and Photoshop and stuff for continuing education.
Wow!
Right about the time I was graduating. Then I graduated, and then I got another job teaching in the illustration department, teaching digital illustration, which I did for
at
RISD, which I did for like 25 years. And another year later, got another teaching job at MassArt.
Yeah, well, that's how we met.
Right, yeah, that's where I met you in portfolio class or something like that.
Yeah, It's interesting to hear you say go through your jobs, because now I'm like, oh, that makes sense, because what I loved about your work at the time, or the project you were working on, was the construction site.
Right. Did a 20 some paintings of the construction of Providence Place.
Yeah.
Because that was going on. It happened when I was finishing up with school and starting to teach, and this huge construction site was going on downtown. Maybe I was missing the fun of being on a construction site and all of that, because a couple of times I actually saw my truck on the job while I was taking photographs and all of that. I fell in love with the whole idea of this, and it was when Boston had the big dig, and we called it the little dig.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was an enormous project to try and get this thing built in that tight space. And I was connected to it because of the construction, and I appreciate the guy operating the crane and how all of that, how the logistics, but just the enormity of it. So
it makes sense. Sounds
I
like
had
you work
a whole
with
lot of paintings of girders and steel and
but you
and
worked
cranes.
with your hands for years, it sounds like.
Yep. Yeah. I think I've always been a bit of a tinkerer, thinking back when I was a kid, and I always liked to draw. Seventh grade, I sent in from the matchbook cover to draw the pirate or something, and they sent back a little art test, and I sent it in again, and then they sent a salesman to the house, and my dad went and enrolled me in art instruction schools, and I did drawings and sent them back to somewhere in Kansas City or something like that.
Yeah,
I remember.
Famous artist course, right?
Got feedback from artists who would trace over my drawings and give me pointers and things.
Yeah.
So,
famous artist course, wasn't it?
Art instruction schools.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe it was like their.
I still have maybe so. I still have the books, some of the books, and all the little drawings I made that were really interesting.
Wow.
So yeah, I don't know. And life, comes along, and when you have kids and they need to eat and all that, so I had a real job kind of thing.
Yeah. So then at Mass Art, we did the portfolio side. Yeah. So, but at the time you were also teaching at RISD too, right?
Yep. Yeah. And I was doing 2 part-time positions in art school, 2 different art schools, which was really neat. And so 2 different kind of places, I suppose. It's kind of like white collar, blue collar culture.
Which would you call Mass Art blue collar?
Yes, yes.
Which seems like it would be the flip, because Providence seems like a blue collar town, right?
And I think it is, but RISD is such a prestigious school and has such a long history.
Yeah.
Interestingly, RISD was founded to get more people that had more could do more creative things for the jewelry industry, for instance. That was one of the biggest things. So they were looking to help make more craftspeople for manufacturing, really.
Yeah.
In design. So it's interesting that it really has become an elite school for really majority of people who can afford that school. Yeah. and Mass Art was I think still the only publicly funded art school in the country.
Yeah.
So that people from a blue collar background could go to an art school.
That's why I went.
Yeah. So and what I liked at Mass Art for myself was that I was teaching painting.
Yeah.
I actually sort of switched to painting in acrylics because we were painting in that big tower building.
Yeah.
Climate controlled environment. Right. Didn't want to be making vapors and things. So I just used acrylics. And pretty much the same way I use oils. But now that I'm using oils much more, I did kind of I guess I didn't work with oils for about at least a decade. So, and I was working larger acrylics a little bit more easier to work with for big painting. Now when I make big paintings, I am doing the block in part with acrylics and getting to a certain point and then switching over to oils so that there's a richness of color that I don't get with the acrylics. It's harder to get. You get with layers and layers and glazes. And I just, and still have frustration with the fact that you paint something and it's bright and then you come back after it's dried and it's kind of dull a little bit.
Yeah.
Which it's not nothing like what, it doesn't happen like that in oils.
Yeah.
There's a little of that, but not the same.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, and now you're teaching more like painting.
And
right?
now I'm teaching sophomore oil painting. So it's fresh sophomores, first and second semester, and the majority of the students have never used oil paint before.
Wow.
And some students have never painted before, except with their iPad and their Apple Pencil.
Oh, wow. So digital.
So that's a different thing now that I'm, after teaching students how to use that pencil, the digital tablet and all that, and those kind of software packages. I don't teach any of that anymore, and I teach total traditional oil painting, and we use gouache as well. And it's really, I think it's at least 3 years now since I did a digital painting.
Wow. And
I know how to do it. And it's really convenient on my iPad to just dash something off. I don't need a box of paints or I don't have to get messy. But I don't know, it's hard to see it. The color changes so much between the screen and you make it. And then, so I just like the traditional, I always was traditional painter.
Sounds like more of a...
I'm stuck in the past anyway, Todd.
I don't think so. I
so it feels good. It just feels authentic, and I'm able to work on my craft and how I use paint, and it's just me and the paint, and there aren't all these other buttons to push and these other things to think about. So I'm able to let my brain relax and paint. Yeah. So I'm not able to do that. I don't know if I ever really did with digital painting. It was always sort of playing for me because I was always traditional painting at the same time. Yeah. So for me, I learned how to do it so I could teach it to my students. And so I did quite a few commercial jobs, digital paintings and Illustrator work. I did a lot of Illustrator work, Adobe Illustrator, vector imagery. And I don't know, I'm a purist about oil painting now, and I feel
it's different. It's a different experience, right?
Yeah, and it's maybe more personal, more closer, and and I don't know. It just sometimes it's difficult for me to get myself up and geared up for painting, but as soon as I start painting, everything relaxes and time kind of slows down. And
I feel it's like yoga.
It's
meditative.
So I should just paint more.
I feel like there's a thread between your story and what you were saying about your hands and working with them. And it feels like when I see your interest in clay, which is hands-on, and then painting, which is feeling. That I think humans enjoy that. And I think you miss it when you do digital. And it's not the bad digital, because digital is fun too. Yeah.
And I think we, our brains get a hold of us sometimes. And for me, the hands working keeps my mind from overdoing it and overthinking things and getting anxious about stuff. Because as an artist, where I don't have a job with someone telling me do this now and get that and that. I have time to think. I have lots of time to overthink, and if I'm working, I don't know. It keeps my mind going in the right direction, or just relaxes. It is very much like a meditation. I think as I'm maturing, let's say, I'm getting better at that kind of just letting myself. That's what we're all trying to do, is ease ourselves into that higher state of consciousness when we're painting, or different state of consciousness, that we're totally focused. That's what I feel is. That's what keeps my brain from going off onto other tangents when I'm working. It's just hyper focus on that thing in front of you that. And I think that's what makes me want to paint, kind of like an addiction but it's peacefulness once you get there.
Yeah.
Sometimes painting is really frustrating when it doesn't come out the way you want it to come out, or your vision that you thought of, and it just sort of doesn't happen sometimes. But the process when you're actually painting that's what I'm after now, I guess.
Yeah.
And I'm
being in it.
And of course I want to sell paintings, and I have a show coming up and trying to get my work out there more, but it's really to justify that I get to have more time to paint, or to force me to paint more, kind of. I guess I do have to sort of trick myself into get back to work sometimes. And it's not that I'm not doing anything. I have the bonsai trees too, so I'm either working on the pots or working on a painting or working on my trees, and it's kind of a good balance.
Yeah.
I do get a little burnt out. I get a little, when you've been painting strictly for a long time on a series of things. For me, they don't just get worked on and finished. There's a whole bunch of paintings around the studio that I'm kind of working on.
Yeah.
But I've been really working on kind of resolving some, or being happy with them, so that I can actually sign them. And then there's times when I just have to let that go and come over here to the pottery and just make pots. Because I can really lose myself and make pots, and I don't have as much stress about the outcome with the pottery for some reason.
Yeah.
They happen quicker, and it's have much more fun, I think.
Yeah.
Making pots is like being a kid and playing in mud.
Yeah. We're talking about all this like chocolate, right? It feels like
it's like chocolate. I just want to take a bite out of it.
Or baking or something.
Yeah. We have grandkids now, and when my granddaughter Lily was very small, about a year old, she came and stayed with my wife, was taking care of her, myself too. But that really helped my painting too, being with a little toddler and painting on the floor with newsprint and poster paints and getting paint. And little kids, they make lots of nice colors, and then they just keep stirring it up and turn it all into a big pile of mud.
Yeah.
But it was just fun, and it kind of reminded me that painting can be fun, and it's there is an intense focus, and it's kind of exhausting, but there's moments when it just feels like this is exactly what I should be doing this moment in time, without question. And that's not always the case in life. Sometimes we wonder, should I do this? I have lots of choices.
Or how it will be perceived, right?
Yeah. And I'm getting better at that too, about worrying what other people think about what I'm doing. I think. I like to say that, and I think it's true, but it's still, you want people to like what you're doing. It feels good. And
I think first you have to like it, and then the audience is kind of hopeful that they'll like it. But there's a quote by Rumi. He says, "I want to sing like birds sing, without a care who listens or what they think."
That's pretty sweet.
Yeah. I feel like we kind of paint in bliss because it keeps us happy.
Yeah. And I think about like, what's this for? What's the goal of me painting here? And like someone said it, and I can't quote people like you can, Todd, at all, especially anymore. I've lost my train of thought about what I was just going to say.
Oh, why we paint?
Yeah, why we paint. Thank you. This, my students are good at that, recovering my
I got you.
my lapse
I got your
sometimes.
back. Yeah.
Thank you. And why we paint, I think, I can't remember where I heard it, but it's to show other people what we see.
Yeah.
It's that, and those are I think my best paintings, when something smacks me in the face, like the sky or a tree, it's just a shape.
Yeah.
And the sun hitting a wall or something, I just go, wow, look at that. Those are the paintings I have to make. Yeah. And sometimes I go to a Rhode Island urban sketcher group once in a while sometimes, and we go to a place and just sit down and make something. And I find that sometimes I really have to walk around for a while until it's better for me not to jump into something or make something work. Just draw. Have to rely on my passion or my feeling of being kind of overwhelmed by something, the wow thing.
Find something of interest there and beautiful.
And that's what I want when I make an image. I want other people to go, wow. Yeah. It doesn't always happen, but yeah, that's what our objective is, to wow people.
Yeah. So there's an overlap. As you were just touching on, you do your bonsai trees, which I have a couple. You've given me a few over the years. They're absolutely gorgeous. Why don't you touch on that? But you're also painting for a show in which you're doing paintings of nature. So there's always like this kind of Venn diagram overlap between your interests, right?
I think so. Maybe I start to see it now, because they've always felt very separate. Mm-hmm. Pottery here and painting and teaching and bonsai. The bonsai has been just an escape, which I don't know, painting is as well. So is pottery.
How did you get into it?
From life.
Because you had all this like construction work job.
And I've always appreciated trees, although in my youth, with this wood stove here, my brothers and I cut down lots of trees to keep the house warm and all of that. Some of them I regret. But we were always outside. We were fishing. We were running in the woods down. So as I get older, it feels like the things that were from my childhood just give us comfort, that make me feel good to do.
It ordered your interest too, it seems like.
Yeah. And it was in the Boy Scouts, did a lot of camping. So the bonsai, it really started by seeing a little bonsai kit in a seed catalog that I bought. That was just a way to get $15 out of people with a little tiny juniper that in 50 years might be a nice bonsai, and a little pot so that I got the bug, grew that for a year or two till that died, and collected any kind of pine trees or things around that I would find, or little junipers from Home Depot or something like that. There was one that was when I was driving my truck. So I was driving the truck, dealing with angry men all day, a lot of the times. And but I also
come home and center yourself.
It was a good job. It was a union job. I had really good health benefits. So we had 3 babies, and just about everything got paid for. So I worked really hard and destroyed my knees a little bit and stuff. And now my hands are giving me trouble, and I
killed my shoulders
about that stuff
when I did concrete forms.
Yeah. So, but it was a good job, and it was good for the family. I'm collecting a little bit of a pension now from back then. So, unfortunately, I don't. The people doing that work nowadays, they probably make the same money I did in the 90s, 80s. I'm sorry. And probably have much less health benefits than we had back then. Yeah. So yeah, and it wasn't necessarily the pots, but the bonsai trees, collecting bonsai trees,
which led to the pots.
Right. Yeah. So, and that would be after coming home from a rough day, and then it was great to have the kids, be happy dad's home and all of that stuff. Yeah. But a little bit of peace and quiet, was just out snipping on the trees and working in the garden. And after finding a couple of bonsai outlets in Massachusetts, I was driving my truck down in Littleton, Mass, and found Bonsai West, and pulled over to the side, and there were bonsai trees, a whole garden of bonsai trees. So that's, and later I found, just a half an hour away in Bellingham, is New England Bonsai, who now is my wholesaler, and Bonsai West sells my pots as well, but they're farther away, and it's become, I have a good business relationship over there at Bonsai, New England Bonsai, and they buy lots of my pots. And so I just now decided I'm definitely kind of closing down my online shop, because I sold a lot of pots online. And it's just become so cumbersome and expensive to ship and all of that. So I'm wholesaling to another person who ships all over the place. They sell a lot of stuff.
But that's what led you to making pots,
so
right?
The making of the pots happened when I had a lot of these trees, and I saw these beautiful pots at the bonsai nursery, but I couldn't afford them. I couldn't justify that kind of money when I have children, and so I bought little plant pots and drilled holes in them to kind of make drainage, and found ways to use plastic things that looked like a bonsai pot, but and ultimately decided, after I saw a kiln and this wheel and a little kiln on Craigslist, and just said, let me go get that and try it out, and I learned how to make pots after 3 months of not being able to center the clay, and just kept trying and making a big mess, and finally it started to click.
No one showed you how to do it?
I watched a lot of YouTube videos. I didn't take any pottery classes, and I like to figure things out. And I took out so many books out of the RISD library of ceramics. But what really helped me was a guy at Mass Art. I think you might have known him. His name was Jim Weiner. He was a library guy.
Of course, yeah.
He was the computer guy. Yeah. And he was a ceramicist. He had an MFA, PFA in ceramics.
Know that.
And he invited me up to Mass Art. And so it was the only time I sat on a wheel, and he sat right next to me, and he said, do this and do this. And I watched, and I did it. And after about 2 hours of hanging out with Jim, I could throw. I could center it. It just clicked. But, so he wasn't any kind of my teacher or anything, but he showed me just how to center the clay because he was just really experienced, and I think also because I had been struggling for 2 months, and why isn't this working? And I watched this video, and I know, and I don't know, he was right there, and I could see him just drop it into center, and it kind of worked. It might have not been in that minute, but in the few days after that meeting with him,
you got it.
I actually remember I pictured a kind of a line from my center of my head right through the clay, right through the axle of the wheel, right down to the center of the earth, and I kept my head right there, and it all happened. Wow! It was really a magical kind of experience when I said, "Wow, I can center it now," and then everything goes from that.
And how much you probably appreciated that from the 3 months of not centering it, right?
Yeah. And, I made a few pots here and there. And it's, I think I taught a digital class of RISD faculty a few times. And they were the worst students I ever had. And I'm saying, myself too, I'm too old to be a good student or something now, because I want to learn it myself and not do those things that we do in class, exercises to learn how to do something. So the one thing I never did with clay was try to throw a cylinder and then cut it in half.
Yeah.
I look at what you did. Try and throw a cylinder, cut it in half. Throw a bowl, cut it in half, which they teach you in class. They don't worry about making a bowl. Just teach the concept of centering the clay. But I didn't take any pottery classes, so I didn't have that sense.
Like doing scales.
And I was too intense about making a pot. I gotta make pots, and it's frustrating because I can't make a pot. And it's only because I didn't know the fundamentals about centering the clay first. So it, taught me about patience, but I stuck in there. And, there were times when I said, all right, maybe this isn't for me. I'm just be a painter. And not,
but you still had it, right? So you kept going?
Yeah. And now there's times, I think it was at least 3 months that I didn't make any pots this year after like April or so. And I was painting and I was getting my boat in the water and all of that stuff. So there's lots of things going on, and it's sometimes just good to I know it's sitting here, and it's also kind of refreshing now, a little bit different than painting, that if I took 3 months off of painting and drawing, it's going to take a little time to get it back. When I go back, I got to paint for a while, paint some ugly stuff again and kind of get but with the pots, it just feels like I can just come over here and just throw some pots almost any time, and it's almost relaxing.
Yeah. So there's a story, obviously, with the pots too, and you have a couple if you want to show them. Do you want to grab one?
Sure. One.
So these
kind
are
like.
Yeah. So talk about the pot and.
Well, it's
just hold it up a little bit.
There we are. So it's stoneware clay. It's got a big hole in the bottom for plants that need good drainage, and it's got a couple of wire holes so you can wire that plant right in there. This is a super dark clay. So this one was actually, the wall of it was thrown on the wheel, and then it was sliced off and dropped onto a slab. And then the feet. So I have a slab roller, and I have a little tool. There it is right here. The best tools are the ones that you make. So this little caster wheel with some notches out of it
makes... Move back a little bit so they can see it.
Makes this, that texture right there. So this has become a little bit of a signature mark for me. And I put it on in the process and then sort of stretch it out. So it's always a little bit different. And this clay, for instance, is for bonsai. We use this stuff called akadama that comes from Japan. It's very gravelly clay product that's for good drainage, and you have to sift out all the fine particles. And so I have a lot of these finer particles of this akadama stuff that we use for bonsai, and I mixed it in this batch of clay, so you'll be able to see that kind of orange within this really super dark clay. So for all the people who do bonsai, it might kind of be significant to see the akadama right in there in the clay. But it's fun to experiment. We'll see what happens. And yeah, I really have some fun, and sometimes I just grab a piece of clay and start squishing it around until it becomes a pot. And I'm making a lot of small ones because I have a show coming up soon, which is the Cactus and Succulent Society of Massachusetts Festival in Norfolk, Massachusetts. And I've been doing that show for a few years. I don't do too many shows anymore, but that one, the people who have succulent plants and cactuses are just like the bonsai people. It's kind of like a pet, and you want to, you buy the dog a really nice dog leash and dog dish, and so they don't mind spending money on something for their precious plant. And it's kind of, so I talked to someone last night who said, I think about you just about every day, Paul. And I said, I haven't seen this person, married to someone I teach with, for probably, 8 or 10 years or so because of COVID and everyone goes different ways. But I said, no, you don't. And she said, no, I have a little cup that you made, and I use it every day with my tea. So that just makes me feel really good.
That's awesome.
I think that's what I like about the pottery, and the same about the painting, that it really feels good to have someone appreciate what you've done or move someone somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's our goal, right?
Yeah. We're lucky.
Yeah.
And sometimes it doesn't feel that way, but yeah, we're lucky.
Well, it comes with a lot of frustration, I think, that people don't think about.
Yeah, and we're also, I think, due to Instagram, social media, everyone loves everyone else's stuff. We used to like, I love it, it's great, I love it, it's beautiful. So I see that when I'm out painting. I've done a couple of live painting events this summer where people kind of feel obligated to come by and say, looks good. Hey, looking good. Looks good.
Yeah. I like
so it's like, pushing that like button. And it's different. I'm used to people coming up and talking to me while I'm working. And that kind of feels like a new thing that the last few times everyone's, hey, looks good. Hey, that looks good. Maybe it just looks good, Todd.
Yeah. So there's also the bonsai. Don't you you do bonsais and haven't you put them in shows and shown your bonsais?
Yes, and I actually have one right now that I am hoping some new buds will pop out, because there's a show for a thing called the Kaiku Study Group at New England Bonsai. So there's a show every September. So in September, people have been working on a tree for the summer to try and have it just right for the show. And if my little yew that I've had for a long, long time, if it doesn't put out some new buds in the next couple of weeks, I'll have to maybe pick something else to put in the show. I'll put something in there. It's a...
But you've placed in the shows, haven't you?
Actually, I had a pot of a rectangular pot that was in a juried bonsai pot exhibition in Washington, D.C. at the National Arboretum, at our National Collection of Bonsai.
Wow.
And I think there have been 2 of those shows in the last 50 years or so, and I would love if there's another one that happens there. But I place second in the rectangular category.
Wow.
And won a prize, which we went down there for a bonsai convention that was kind of happening at the same time. So I had to take that prize money and go bought a tree.
Wow. Seems fitting.
Yeah. And a lot of the trees I have I've collected them in the woods somewhere, or bought them off a bargain bench or something like that. So it was kind of fun to go to that, accept that award, and then go spend the money right away.
Yeah, that's amazing.
But that was. I'm making a few pots like that now with this big rectangle with a big, very wide lid on the top, lip on the top.
Yeah.
And that was put on. It wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for this bonsai potter, Ron Lang, who was one who organized the whole thing. So.
It's amazing. You've got your hands in a lot of different things. I do.
Yeah. And I kind of like now that I'm teaching 1 class per semester. I remember back when I was teaching continuing ed classes, there was 1 year I taught 14 classes.
Oh my gosh.
Daytime computer continuing ed classes and a illustration department class and 2 classes at Mass Art. And that's when
14?
I think in a year. Yeah.
That's crazy, because there's 5 a semester. Summer. Yeah. Wow.
But they were night courses and day courses.
Hustler.
Yeah. That was back then I was, and that's about all I did was teach.
Yeah.
And it is I had a year and a half when I wasn't a teacher, since becoming an art teacher, painting teacher. I had just couldn't keep up with the digital stuff, and I finally just said I can't do this class anymore. Yeah. And at that time, I hoped to get a painting class instead, but it just wasn't an option. So I sort of retired from RISD, and I was still teaching at Mass Art, and And then I bumped into a former student who was the new department head, and asked Eric Telford, who asked if I would come. Would you please come teach painting?
Yeah.
And I had wanted to teach painting for so long, so I kind of went back out of retirement, and I'm not teaching at Mass Art now. So I teach 2 classes, one in the fall and one in the spring, basic oil painting. And I really love doing it.
Awesome.
It still brings me a little stress the night before, and
same here.
Just before the class starts. But as soon as it happens and we're all painting, I'm in my element. I've always been a little bit self-conscious, and I have this little exit survey that I give to my students. And then on the bottom, because I have a playlist of like 70s rock and roll music, I ask if they like what they thought about the playlist or the soundtrack for the class, and I give them little buttons to check off. It was awesome. It was wicked. It was sick. All these kind of affirmations that I think are cool anymore. They're forgotten now. And then I have an other, and someone just wrote down, and it's not country, it's kind of rock, but she wrote down, I say she because there was only one boy in the class. This person wrote down, I don't care too much for the country, but I really like when Paul starts dancing. And it's because we're all painting. In my painting class, that's when it's best. Everyone's painting, including me. We're all painting from the model or painting from a still life. So we're all reacting to the same thing in front of us, and then I often say, okay, everybody, walk around the room. Let's see what everyone else is doing before we take a break. And so it's a magical thing for a bunch of people to be working on this thing together and see how each of us approach it and what we end up with. But I'm not comfortable to go dancing. I can do it when I'm forced to, but when I'm painting, it happens. And I'm better at just letting that happen now. So when I start painting, I really get very animated.
Yeah. Well, it's a great place to wrap it up. Do you want to talk just briefly about your show that you got coming up? I'm
bringing up tree paintings that I did at Arnold Arboretum. And these paintings are 5 years old. And I sold a lot of the paintings in that show, which were all kind of portraits of the trees at Arnold Arboretum, which is another place I go to just get away from people and walk in the woods and see amazing trees that have been here for 100 years or so from all over the world. So now I have these paintings that have been just put away since those shows, and I've pulled them out again, and I'm kind of not reworking them, but doing a little bit of work on them, because as we keep going, I'm a better painter than I was 5 years ago, I think. And I see things that I remember at the show. Sometimes it happens, I'm at the show and the whole room is full of my paintings, and I look at 2 or 3 and go, oh, I should have changed that. Oh, how come I didn't finish that? Look at that thing, and kind of critique my work. And it's not a good thing to do. It's
never ending, no.
And it is. I am very critical about my paintings, and it's hard for me to really, love them. But I'm getting better at it. I think it's kind of important that we like what we're doing. Well, we don't always have to be punishing ourselves. Yeah. But yeah, it feels good to go back to those paintings, and I'm kind of pulling all those paintings out of the attic that have been put away, and some of them can just go back in the attic, go somewhere else. Some of them have never meant to really be done because I don't plan them out. They just start on the canvas, and sometimes you get halfway through and decide that it's pretty boring and it's not that exciting.
Yeah.
So it's okay to let them go. But there's some gems in there that maybe I just need to poke a little color here and there, and liven them up a little bit. I'm also feeling much freer about, after being someplace and articulating exactly what's there, that once it gets in the studio, I'm enjoying a little bit more just changing things because I want this color to be stronger. I wanted this place to be quieter. And usually in the studio, things get a little simpler than how complex things are when you're out there painting.
Working off memory or what you want them to see.
For some of these old paintings, it might be helpful for me to just sort of block out some parts and simplify some of the busyness they might have. But I'm enjoying that part, and I'm maybe painting more relaxed. I've always been pretty hyper when I am painting, and we've had enough coffee today that I'm
getting there.
A little jacked up right now.
Awesome.
And this has been a real pleasure, Todd. I really enjoyed this.
Always great talking to you.
Yes.